Bold leaders, no buzzwords, no BS. This is Mastering Workplace Culture, real talk on crafting workplace cultures that deliver results. Each episode, we go beyond corporate speak and talk with leaders who've actually done it. Those who've faced breakdowns, made bold moves, and built organizations where respect and results carry equal weight. If you're ready to challenge assumptions, gain actionable inspiration from proven mentors, and build a workplace culture that actually works, this podcast is for you.
Well, hello and welcome to the next episode of the Mastering Workplace Culture podcast. I'm a co-host. I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm Mark Babbitt. Thanks for being here today.
And we are very excited to have Victoria Pelletier join us, but I'm not going to let her speak until I do her wonderful intro because she's a rather amusing human. So Victoria is a senior transformation executive, practice builder, and globally recognized leadership authority with 25 years plus delivering large-scale change. She has scaled enterprise transformation practices from 2 million to 100 million in 15 months and has led global teams of 100 plus consultants advising Fortune 500 clients. In addition, she's known as the CEO Whisperer, which I totally love. She became one of the youngest COOs in Canada at the age of 24. There might be a story there. And has since held CXO roles across multiple industries and is always focused upon the human side of change. She's a #1 best-selling author, globally sought-after keynote speaker, and in that role of writing and speaking and consulting, she leads Unstoppable You, LLC. You might see that on her LinkedIn posts, which is also a brand advisory firm, which is kind of cool. She's a passionate advocate for equity and inclusion. She's been named one of Involve and YouTube's 100 outstanding global LGBTQ executive role models and has built a prominent global platform anchored on a single, almost mission-like conviction of leadership, performance, and humanity are not mutually exclusive. You might have seen her across global stages, media platforms, a TEDx talk where her healthy resilience presentation continues to challenge outdated models of leadership and personal success. Victoria, we're so thrilled you're here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, let's dive in. So I want to dig into that senior leadership experience, 24 plus years in organizations like Accenture, IBM, American Express, among others. In leading companies and teams in those roles, what were your biggest challenges when you got into the business, the role, and found less than healthy workplace cultures?
It's sad, Chris, the number of organizations I've worked in and or consulted for where culture was just broken. So I've seen it much of my career, and I think a lot of that has to do with much more of that kind of command and control environment I walked into in many of them. And there's been like a crescendo, a rise in employees demanding something very, very different. I think of, my first executive role was shared in my bio. It came at age 24. So it was a massive stretch role for me. I started working at 11. My first leadership role was at age 14, but still a stretch role. I stepped into general management and chief operating officer for a private outsourcing organization with I think something like 6,000 employees. At that point.
Huge.
I led all functions except for finance within that organization. And the world of outsourcing in North America, at least, is not generally the destination job. It is a role that you look for when you are a new immigrant to the country, you are underemployed, unemployed, And that was the first that really started to teach me a lot about how I would think about building the right kind of culture and environment. We had 300+% turnover in that organization, which is sadly not totally uncommon in the outsourcing world, but still much higher than I wanted to have within our organization. So being, very focused and embracing, and that's also where my focus on diversity, equity, inclusion came, not only from being someone who sits in part of, a marginalized community. However, I recognize I also still have privilege. But how did I bring that all into, the environment to create a place of belonging, psychological safety within that organization? And so that it's just been my mission. I was doing it because I believed it was the right thing. I didn't have a proven track record of it yet, but I know it felt right for me. And now that's what I've leaned into. And for the last 25, 26 years, operating as an executive, I've brought that into every organization that I've worked in.
That's awesome. I have to tell you that at 24, I was an idiot. So I should not have been invited to manage, any organization of any size. So that's very impressive, as is the vision that you had and the understanding that 300% plus turnover rate is really not healthy, and maybe we can fix that, which I bet we'll learn about. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, Victoria, you mentioned your some of your biggest challenges within your mindset, within your vision. What were some of your biggest successes? What, looking back on your career, what are you most proud of?
I am proud that I have built a significant amount of followership. I can quote lots of statistics on turnaround, financial performance, the reduction in turnover, a bunch of metrics. But the fact that I have team members who followed me from company to company, for me, speaks volumes. People who would, follow me through the proverbial fire, and, to new and challenging and bold adventures. That's something I'm incredibly proud of.
What do you attribute that to specifically?
What I refer to as whole human leadership. That's my phrase, just for, being the kind of human I would like to work for. Sadly, Mark, I don't have tons of great examples like mentors. I have a number of good leaders I worked for, but I've learned more so from leaders who I aspire to be nothing like. Whether it was their ethics, their values, poor communication, their commitment only to themselves. So for me, this whole human leadership is building real relationships with people, investing in them and their career. It also means that I'm sharing with them vulnerability, which I didn't do early in my career. Being a human myself, to create again that safe place, to be committed and invested in their personal and professional development, even if sometimes that meant I needed to make a recommendation that could have hurt my business by saying, you know what, it's time for you to grow and move on.
Well, and I love your insight that when people follow a leader, that's not because the leader sucks. It is because they are feeling a connection. They feel validated and respected, which is a big part of our work. And did you ever go into roles over the past 24 years where the culture was really something you were proud of even to work there? Or has it been more of the unfortunately less healthy cultures you've experienced?
There have been a couple companies that I would say I think the culture was really great. I worked for American Express. That was a really great, right? And it was when Ken Schultz was the CEO. Steve Squary's ascended after he retired, but that it wasn't just pride, it felt great. So that was one where there was, a positive culture to work in. There's been a number of more that I consulted for. There's been some really sort of mid-sized companies that I think are really committed to, focusing on their. In fact, I write for health agency. I just believe in their, like every once in a while as an independent freelance author, contributing to their magazine. And they're 300-person healthcare organization in Western California. And just like, they've got it right. They're focused on like that. They've got, someone that's focused on change management because they've done some acquisitions and things like that. So I have seen some, yes, Chris. The sad part is there are many, many more that are just incredibly unhealthy, where they've done a great job of, putting vision, mission, values on the board or the intranet site. And it's really just an aspiration.
Well, and that leads me to where I discovered you. I'm slow on the uptake of your brilliant LinkedIn post 2 months ago now, with the photograph of the values and then spray painted "not here" on it. Fabulous, AI assisted. I know I do that all the time. But the title of the post was "Your values are a lie and your employees know it." And it's unfortunately your experience mirrors that of Mark's and mine. And there are leaders that, and you spoke about coaching someone that you thought they'd have a better opportunity somewhere else, and it was going to hurt your business. And it's like, well, but they're going to leave sometime soon if there's not a greater challenge, opportunity, etc. for them. And I think leaders are very fearful often of when they see bad behavior, they don't know what to do about it. It's kind of outside, the focus, the singular focus is results. And we believe that's half the leader's job, respect being the other half. But what prompted that brilliant article that you decided to highlight how most companies' values are lies?
It was a lot of my writing ends up being somewhat topical and related to the things that I'm personally experiencing at that moment or I'm focused on. And so I had been working with an organization who really believed that they had a strong company culture. This was one who had a great leadership handbook, and they had the ways of working, and they believed. And I said, much like I just said now, I see some who put things on the wall or share on, the employee intranet, and it's just an aspiration, and it's not a reality. And it's incentives drive behavior. And with this company I was working with and some of their C-suite executives, they were shocked to see their employee engagement had declined. Their executive engagement alone was down 12%. And I said at one point, the CEO whisperer, you said, Chris, in my intro, I get that because I speak truth to power. I'm not like your typical consultant who tells clients what they want to hear. I tell them what they need to hear. I built trust so that I'm able to do that. And I said, at what point then, if we're going to question the employee engagement and build a path and a strategy around it, do you not hold a mirror up to the leaders in the organization? And as I was enmeshed in that organization, I could see that everything from the sales credit that was, awarded, rewarded around, redistributed unfairly across the organization, to the toxic top performers, just because they had sold a big deal, or because they had an SVP title. It was working with that organization where I was like, we're going to hold the mirror up, people. And so that was the genesis behind that particular post that you saw, Chris.
Well, and Mark, you and I have both had clients where there was that misinformed confidence that we've got our, values painted on the conference room walls. Well, that certainly is an interesting practice. But if it's not visible and the opposite is visible, what do? How do you help those leaders understand it's their own freaking failures that are driving people's frustrations?
I spend a significant amount of time with people in the organization, and not just the hierarchical. Like when I've been a part of more than 40 merger acquisition transactions in my career, 100 plus corporate restructure. And it's not the pure org chart and hierarchy. I spent a lot of time to understand the political capital that sits in connections around, and having conversations with people and asking bold questions, and then replaying back from a place of like confidence and anonymity. I'm not there to call anyone out, but I want them to know I'm a safe place to come. And then I also just learned about all the puzzle pieces. I share that very directly with the leaders. And if it's not through me, I do often encourage things like doing a 360 review by a independent third party to come back when the data is there and they could read directly the feedback that's come back, versus those that are sugarcoating, that are yes people and don't want to tell their boss something they're fearful of. That is incredibly powerful.
Victoria, you've proven over your career that it is possible to have a life in which women can succeed as moms and spouses and corporate executives and CEO whisperers, much more. Along the way, how often did you experience a culture that fully enabled that whole human experience? And when you didn't, when you weren't in the middle of a culture like that, how did you stay inspired? How did you stay solution focused?
Specifically, Mark, as a woman and as a mother?
Yeah. I mean, I got to tell you, I love this question. Chris wrote this question, by the way, not me.
You can blame me.
Because my wife is experiencing this issue right now. She has a boss that fully understands that, yes, she's an executive, but she also has a life. And it's unusual for her, especially to have a male boss who understands how important that is. So yes, certainly from a mom and a spouse position, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm a bit odd, and maybe I'll be a bit controversial, Mark, if I tell you what I'm going to say. So I'm a big believer that there are no schedules. There are just deliverables. That's been the way I've operated always. Mm-hmm. It's the way I've led my team. That said, I have had to tell my own team, do as I say, not as I do. I've chosen to work on vacations. I don't want to come back to 1,000 emails. I do not expect for my team to do that. And now as a mother, I've sat on the flip side where I think I've worked for some organizations that expected me to take more time, to make more trade-offs for my family than for the choices I made professionally. For me, I hate the question about work-life balance, because it's about work-life integration, and it's all of those things. And so I have this saying, where there's conviction, there's capacity. So if I have maintained conviction around what do I want to achieve from my health, from my relationship, from my role as a parent and partner, what do I need to achieve from a work perspective? I've put, I'm clear on the outcomes and the goals I want to achieve. I then become maniacal about saying things that don't align with those, that don't bring me personal, professional joy or value. I say no, I delegate, I outsource. But I find myself sitting and have needed to explain, and I won't say anyone makes me feel guilty, but I have felt the attempt, the burden of guilt. I gave birth to my second child at 7:00 in the morning. I was released from the hospital the same day. Sadly, my ex was in the middle of chemotherapy treatments. I drove home post. But we were in the middle. I gave birth a little bit earlier than expected, like a week early, but and we were in the middle of a massive migration and transformation. And I hopped online and responded to some emails at 9:00 that night. My choice. And because I had a partner who was at home recovering from cancer, I went back to work right away. And so I felt a lot of people question. However, I believe, again, you make choices at times in your life. Many years later, although I did get divorced, and shared custody of my children. My ex passed away from a second bout of cancer. And as a now single parent who traveled 80% of the time for my work, I made the decision to leave a company I love, which was Amex, to go to a role that had me traveling less than 10% of the time, predominantly based in the same city that my children were versus 80% travel across North America. So again, I've made choices at times in my life that were right for my family, for me, and for my career. And that's how I've chosen to be an executive, be a partner, be a parent, and have success across all of those dimensions.
Well, I want to ask, because I don't know what the answer is, what the right answer is in the midst of that, and great culture at American Express. You felt reinforced, validated, supported up until you had single parenthood right there in front of you. Have you been able to leverage your experiences like those with clients that you're working with, maybe not working for, but would American Express have changed policies just for you? Was that something you explored at that time? Because a lot of big corporations, the rules got to be the same. It's this, multinational, all kinds of complexities with making special cases. So did they consider that for you at that time?
So I should state, I left American Express. This was like 13 years ago. So one, I can't even speak to the culture. Aside from the years that I worked for them, nor can I speak to their time since. I will state that it was at a time the business unit of Amex that I worked at had sold 50% of it to a private equity firm. And I was one of the executives locked in as a result. It created some significant challenge for me. I worked for a female leader who was surprisingly not as supportive in making an exception, which I found interesting because typically you talk about, Mark, your wife working for a male, and being a little surprised of his support. I generally would expect that from a woman. And so it's 13 years ago. I don't want to speak negatively at all, but there was just exigent circumstances around that would have made it very difficult for me to find another, role within, to not have me. I was also working, my job was New York based. My children were home base was Toronto at the time. So there were just a bunch of dynamics that to factor in then. And so I don't begrudge Amex for not being able to make it work at that point. Nor do I speak to their culture as it was today, just my experience for the couple of years I was there.
Well, what I find interesting is that sometimes, as you say, as a consultant, you earn trust to be able to challenge norms, assumptions, stupid policy, right? That kind of thing. And I'll bet you've been able to relate, maybe not the details of that story, but with some of the clients that you're facing, saying, this is what your people are facing. And are you willing to let this brilliant man, woman walk out the door? Because that may not serve you in the long run. Is that something you're able to do?
Oh, absolutely. More recently, I actually had a relatively new hire. I think he'd only been with the company that I was at for maybe a couple of months. And unfortunately, his father was in palliative care of cancer himself and passed away. And I think as the oldest child and needing to take care of a lot from the family, there was no question for me. It was take all the time you need. And we had actually, he was such a rock star and had built an amazing pipeline, which was amazing. But for him to have to step away for what ended up being a couple of weeks, no question.
Yeah, no big deal.
That comes first. The business stuff we'll deal with later. And so that's how that's part of the whole human leadership. We don't park that stuff at the door. When we walk into the literal office or, virtual one that, we all work in now.
Yeah, it is. And I'll bet you that kind of experience from that person would put him in the category of following you wherever you move, because that's just a huge validation and respect that you were showing in that instance.
Victoria, you've already mentioned that you hate the work-life balance question, so I hope this doesn't come across as that. And you also mentioned where you had to leave a highly successful job with a worldwide known company because your personal choice was more important than trying to thrive within their culture. But go into more detail, if you will, about some of the choices you've had to make, like the one at Amex, even though you said, do as I say, not as I do. Well, you done pretty good then when you chose to leave. But in your work, in your company, with those people who work for you, give us an example where you just looked at somebody and said, you know what, we have to make accommodation right now. Your life changed, your circumstances changed, and we're going to accommodate that to the best of our ability. And what was their reaction when that happened?
Yeah, I've done that time and time again. And as I said, my saying is there's no schedule, just deliverables. I find, there's many, particularly in like shared parent families and working like that, or even if it's a still married couple, but both with jobs that are a bit crazy, and there's trade-offs to, take the kids to soccer games or this. And so that for me, it's just like, you've never had to ask me for permission to leave to take an aged parent to the doctor, to take again the kid to a sporting event, at all. I think of even myself when my ex passed away, who you heard me say Toronto, and you might hear a little bit of an accent, probably only when I say 2 words, out and about. That'll give me away as Canadian. Original, that's right. So good Canadian that I am, played hockey. My kids played competitive hockey. My ex, who was an ex-wife, by the way, I'm married to a man now, but I've been openly queer my whole life. But my ex-wife was the big hockey player and actually was heavily involved in coaching my kids' hockey.
Wow.
And when she died,
That's fun.
I made a decision to help support my youngest hockey team to the point that I went from like team manager or trainer to assistant manager to head coach. And I was like, and that was an insane investment at competitive level, an insane investment of my time. We're talking probably 20 hours a week driving between hockey arenas for games, for practices, all of those things. But that meant, I did weird hours, for that year or so that I was the head coach. So no question when some of my, anyone on my team wants that. So I've crafted some very different roles for people, even if that was to work part-time. In some cases, I've actually recognized it had some pretty big implication on their work and the deliverables. And to your point, Mark, like just recognizing, like, we're in a different place right now, but they are so talented. I don't want to lose you. How can we make this work? And if that in the past, it's meant crafting a role that was only 3 days a week versus 5. And that's just fine.
Boy, that's immensely powerful.
Well, I have to tell you, Victoria, you just made your flashback, and I have not thought about this for years. But at one point, Chris, you know this, I was a single father with full custody of 4 kids, and I had no choice but to bring my kids before school and after school to the company that I owned. And so we had that kind of a culture where people could bring their kids, after school or after a doctor's appointment. Eventually I started bringing my dog in. So people started bringing their dogs in.
Love it.
And at one point my office manager came into my office and said, Pepe brought his mom in because he's got no place for his mom to go today. Is that okay here? And I'm like, well, since we've never had any written rules before, and if you can bring your kids, I guess you can bring your elderly parents too, I guess. And so we were literally just making it up as we went along. We were not as formalized as some of these big corporations are, but we just made stuff up, and it turned out to be, and again, I haven't thought about this in years, the most fun work environment for everybody because it was so relaxed. And, my kids actually helped close business. My old English sheepdog helped close business in that environment. So yeah, it was, I haven't thought about that in years, Chris.
That's really cool. Well, the other thing that Victoria, you need to know about Mark is he was his kid's baseball coach for, count them, 35 years, Mark, is that right?
Yeah. And even when my kids weren't playing, I was still coaching. So yeah, we have that in common, that it's time for baseball, and it doesn't matter if the place is going to hell in a handbasket. Coaches, we have to be role models there too, and I can't be late. So, put the fire out, but I'm leaving. It's baseball time. So, yeah.
And most of those times were pre-cell phones. So it's like, no, you can't call me. No, I'm not going to text. No.
Yeah.
I'll look at it, at 10 o'clock tonight, and that's got to be fine.
Yeah.
Well, I wanna tap into not only your expertise as an executive for almost half your life, but as you coach clients and you see that they may have what is in essence a normal culture, doesn't work very well. It's not necessarily, a place of huge well-being for everybody, right? That kind of thing. It could be unfair. It could be, there's all kinds of interesting dynamics that you've seen. How do you start those senior leaders down the path? And you've mentioned data, that undeniable data about the impressions of your first customer, right? Your employees. Are there other things that you look to do to try to kind of, literally Mark and I can have to get to a point of painting the senior exec into a corner to say, if you don't make these changes, then you could be losing talent. And we're talking weeks, because people will talk to us, because I think we build trust going in there too. But how do you start that conversation about, yes, I know you're thrilled about, the production, but it's going down because people are burnout, frustrated, don't feel valued, all those things.
So data is really key, and it's a ton of different metrics, and I'm sure like you're doing the same. It's not just the annual employee engagement survey results. In fact, I don't throw those out, but most employees don't believe that's truly anonymous. And so they tend to not give honest feedback in it. And so I look at very different data points, whether that's, so we talked about turnover. So yes, looking at, voluntary turnover, attrition, what does that look like? To, productivity metrics. If it has declined, what does that look like? There's lots of other different ways, Glassdoor and Fishbowl and all the different places publicly or Reddit, where they can go and say things quasi anonymously. To, if you're a little bit more advanced from a technology perspective, then you can look at sentiment across the employee engagement channels, whether it's Teams, Slack, et cetera. And so there's ways in which you can present the data back. And then, interestingly, trying to convince some leaders that building a healthy culture, building a sense of belonging or inclusion, I know DEI is like the bad phrase to say in North America right now, but, let's talk about belonging and inclusion. That isn't a tick in the box. That isn't just a nice to have. It drives business results. So then I show them the counter data that says, for companies who were in a similar position, had various statistics like data points, who committed to it, this was the business outcome that they saw. So yes, a decrease in attrition and the costs associated with that, the improved productivity gains, the end user customer and the promoter score that's increased because they're dealing with happy employees, like showing them that, so that it just becomes, that's part of your strategy. And by the way, it's not owned by HR.
It can't be.
To help you, we all own that as a leadership team, starting at the top.
Yeah, there's certainly a And Mark and I laugh and talk about, and we're open, I think, with folks who see our work, that we're two old white guys. And yeah, we've lived through experiences to see really great leaders who happen to be old white guys. Many more of them were not. Much, much more diverse, great bosses in both of our experiences. But the idea of trying to have these leaders understand that they can't delegate it to HR. They can't give it to an OD organization. There's without that credibility built by the leaders that make decisions, sign your checks, all that stuff, it never quite takes hold. And you're right. People, we extend a very clear expectation to clients that says, after you define the values and behaviors that you want modeled around here, we're going to measure you all as senior leaders first. And we do these twice a year so that there's a demonstration that we're not calling anybody out. Well, who gave me this score? It doesn't matter. All of them did, right? So, but what's interesting is until they feel a bit of the pressure and literally an undeniable data point that is from their customers, right? The employees, and they're not happy. That's often the biggest lever we have. Mark, what would you add?
I think we all have, I don't know, it seems to me, especially in our divisive times, that people are becoming, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts, almost voluntarily entrenched in poor cultures. And we're afraid to leave. We're afraid to make the tough decisions, even though they make our lives better and our families' lives better. And people don't know, what hiring is going to look like in the next 6 months. So we're not, that's an issue. We could move into a sector where, tariffs or whatever have a huge impact, and now we have no seniority, right? So it seems to me like we're all at this point, almost like we were in the COVID days, where like, nope, I'm just going to stay where I am. I might be completely miserable, but I'm here, and I feel psychologically safe, even if I'm not actually inspired. And so I'm going to stay where I am rather than make a bold decision. And I think it takes, sadly, and the three of us have already talked about this in our previous conversations. People are willing to just put up with crap instead of being in a less safe space. So I think it's interesting what's happening. And with that in mind, Victoria, let me ask this: what, especially as a woman, as a non-old white guy,
clearly,
I would love to hear your thoughts on what people can do in general, but specifically for women, when they're in that position where it's pretty clear that the boss is not going to, either the boss in the subculture that they find themselves within, or the corporation itself doesn't allow for change, doesn't allow for accommodation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what can people do? What options do they have where they aren't going to find themselves, on the outside looking in a worse situation than where they started?
I think there's a bunch of different things I'd suggest, Mark, and both to the employee sitting in the position, but also for leaders across the organization. So I would say for employees, and if we're going to talk specifically about, women, I have this, I sign my social media posts predominantly with 2 hashtags. One of them is unstoppable. The other is no excuses, which drives my children insane. But I'll say that to employees as well. I mean, you have a choice. And I saw you, Chris, do this. There is a myopia that exists, but sometimes out of necessity. And so I will, tell people, like, if you must stay for safety or financial security, be aware that you're doing it with a trade-off that, again, it's not the right culture. It's not creating the right kind of environment. If for you, it's not providing the kind of accommodations. And that's okay. But then do that with intention while you seek to leave. I will also say, like, you need to speak up. You don't ask, you don't get. My youngest has that down pat as well.
Trained well.
Yeah.
You learn from the best.
But in the workplace, so actually, I've worked in and around technology as well for a very long time. And the data is very proven that there's significantly less women in particularly in higher positions in technology. And some of it's around the environment. If we create the right kind of accommodations for those, particularly as women start to become parents, and that going back to like the culture and drive, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. But we need to. So I often tell women, like, you have to put your hand up. The data that shows that women typically don't apply for roles unless they believe they meet 8, 9, or 10 out of the 10 skills criteria that's requested. Men apply at 5 or 6. So there's a confidence also and so those are for the women. So like, you own your career, you might need to try to influence, use your voice. Your voice is your power, and ask for the things that you need. And then if it's proven not to, be successful for you, then make a decision around whether you want to stay or not. And if you're going to stay for a period of time, that's intention as well. And then conversely, for leaders, and particularly male allies for those women, there's so much that can be done. Demanding to have a more diverse slate of candidates when you have a role presented to you. Being comfortable taking the diverse candidate, or in this case, we'll talk about women who might only have 7 out of 10 of the criteria you're seeking, but you are going to coach and develop them for that gap. When you see a woman sitting in a conference room, all of the other, maybe her male counterparts are speaking up. You're going to stop and pause and create a space and say, Sally or Sue, tell me, what's your perspective? What would you do in this situation? Those are very simple ways to help within the organization, particularly if you are a male ally, to your female colleagues.
Well, and very powerful ways of forcing everyone to feel like they belong, have a voice, they can use their voice. And we're darn close to the time we promised you. And Mark, I wonder if you could take the fun. All of these questions have been fun with you, Victoria, but we love to kind of get a bit of what are your passions outside of the workplace. You've given us some of that, but Mark, would you mind diving into that one?
Of course. Well, the first thing I'm going to ask you, Victoria, is right before we started recording, you told us that you took for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, a 2-week vacation, and you didn't like it. And so I got to dive into that more. I'm the same way, by the way. I can't take that much time off. I always have a computer with me. I always have, our vacations always centered around baseball anyway. So there was always something to do. I wouldn't know what to do with 2 weeks off. So tell us about your vacation. Where did you go? What did you enjoy most about it? And what drove you crazy so you couldn't wait to get home?
Yeah. So I turned 50 2 weeks ago, and
happy birthday.
Thank you. And so we're trying to figure out how I would celebrate my adult children. Was challenging to coordinate with their work schedules and things like that. I've got friends all across the world. So my husband and I decided to do a 2-week transatlantic cruise where they reposition the ship, and I live in Miami, so easy to do it from here. They reposition from Miami to Europe. And So I will say the cruise itself was phenomenal. Loved it. I'm a big, I'll plug Virgin Voyages. I love my children and I hope to be a grandmother someday, but there's no children allowed on the ship. So, so adult experience.
Big win.
Great food, live music, like their entertainment was great. So it was good. We actually, because we're locals, we did I coordinated a meetup the day before. So for those who were in town, so that 16 people who showed. So then when we all got on the ship, you at least knew, the other 14 or 15 people, that you had met. And so I met great friends. I ended up being able to like host a party in our cabin, our suite on the ship. So it was great. I loved it. The ports were fun. What I didn't enjoy, Mark, is the gym. I work out 6 days a week. So if you want to ask about other activities and hobbies, I've always been a fitness fanatic, both in team sports as well as like within the gym. And so the gym there is not amazing. And I am a mom to a fur baby. And although we have an amazing dog sitter, I was missing him. And quite frankly, I was also just missing my own bed. So not saying I wouldn't do 2 weeks again. And I did not bring my work laptop, but I was on my phone, cleared up some emails and things like that. My team, I trust very much. And so they held down the fort exceptionally well. So I would do it again, but probably in smaller, I stick with what I was doing in smaller chunks, like about like a week at a time.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let me put you on the spot a little bit. You have 72 hours, no phone, no laptop, no work of any kind. Where do you go and what do you do?
Once the heart palpitations stop, because I've ever done that. If I could still have a device, because I listen to podcasts and I consume content. So it would be all about self-care. I would listen to music while getting a massage or other body treatments. I would work out. I would relax. Like I said, I'm a consummate consumer of content. So I'd make sure that I've got. If I can't have my phone, I don't know how I get it. If I'm not allowed to have a device, the old what's it called? I don't even remember what the old Apple
kind of the old iPod kind of thing. It wasn't a phone.
I forgot about those. Yeah,
I'd have to secure one of those then. But with my favorite, and also ideally with my favorite humans around me. So my husband, my kids, and the dog, if possible. But
I love it. I love it. Well, one of the
I loved your initial heart palpitations first.
Yeah.
I need to breathe. That's hilarious. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just saying, one of the reasons I asked that is because I'm the same way as you are. I just don't take time off. Right. So my wife's, my 65th birthday has just passed.
Oh.
And we chose not to do anything because we had baseball commitments. But my wife just recently asked me if I can ever get you to like turn your brain off and do something that you and the rest of the family would enjoy. What would it be? And she pinned me down and made me come up with something. And Chris, you and I were talking about this, but we came up with fly fishing in Montana or Wyoming. And I agreed that if we could arrange that for the family, the kids, grandkids, my wife and I, that I would leave everything behind physically and mentally and just enjoy those 3 or 4 days doing that, with the condition we had to be doing something all the time. No sitting around, no waiting, no waiting on, including waiting on people. Like if we're supposed to be somewhere at a certain time, everybody has to be completely on board, because that would drive me crazy. If we're late, I can't do that. So
for you.
Yeah.
And he'd be cooking the fish, by the way.
And I would, because I love cooking. My wife loves cooking. We will cook all the meals. That's part of the community. That's part of family. So no restaurants, no disappointments, let everybody bring what they want to bring to cook, but it's all about community and gathering and keeping, relatively busy. So
That's great.
all right, let me ask you one more question, Victoria, on the more personal side. Are you still involved in hockey? You were firmly entrenched with your kids as hockey, and you've shared with us that you don't have grandchildren yet. So is hockey still an important part of your life, either as a spectator or as a participant?
So participant, no, which saddens me. I personally was playing several times a week. That was my cardio. And then I did six days a week of weight training.
Impressive.
I had a horrible accident a few years ago. I was in a wheelchair for months after breaking 3 of 4 appendages, shattering my knee. I don't feel comfortable playing hockey again, although I kept my skates. But now I live in South Florida, where it's a lot harder to play. When I lived in New York and Toronto, a lot easier. That said, we are in the middle of NHL playoffs. And so I was awake much later than I would normally be last night to see the finals of the Habs against the Buffalo Sabres. So I don't necessarily cheer for either of those teams, but it gets exciting. So I'm definitely a spectator. And when I have grandchildren, I've told both kids, I said, one, if not both of you, does need to make me a grandmother at some point. I said, I was a young mother by choice. Don't make me a young grandmother by accident. But will be very excited to be a grandparent. And I'm sure those kids will likely be getting on hockey skates as well.
Love it.
That's awesome. Well, Victoria, this has gone by just at light speed. You are a delightful human, and we are so pleased to be able to engage you with some of this cool culture stuff. And I know our listeners really appreciate it as well. But that brings us to the end of this episode. Victoria, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And please take a look at other episodes if you haven't seen them all yet. And we typically publish on Tuesdays. So there's many, many more cool guests, maybe not quite as cool as Victoria, but cool guests to come here on the Mastering Workplace Culture podcast. Thank you both.
This has been Mastering Workplace Culture. No jargon, no corporate fairy tales, just leaders who show their scars and celebrate their wins. Do something with what you heard today. Subscribe, share, take action. Creating a culture that equally values respect and results is your responsibility. Go own it. When you're ready to make that happen, we're here to help. We'll catch you in the next episode of Mastering Workplace Culture.